Hello. In this video, we're going to go over how to use React Router, which is a React library that's going to allow us to support client-side routing, which lets us have multiple pages, multiple sort of different pages we can view within a single React application. So to motivate this a little bit, let's look at our React Chat application so far, because that's the example that we're going to build this example within that application. So I've readjusted our React Chat application so far to give it multiple different pages. These pages are all being sort of listed inside of the application component. So in our app component, we are showing our header bar as normal, and then we're able to have a number of different pages that we're able to show. I have a static welcome page, right, which just says welcome to React Messenger. I should say something different. I have a chat page, which is our chat system as existed previously, right? It all works exactly the same way. We have a about page that just has some about text and with a big orange background so we can see that it's different. I've created a separate sign-in page for letting the user pick a user using our same drop-down functionality. And again, this all works. It all does exactly what we'd expect. It's just that when we click the button, it does the change within that single page. And then finally, I've got an error page as well if we want to show that something went wrong, right? I've got a way of saying there's a page not found. So to start off with, I've defined these different components. Each one of is a different page. I haven't actually created different different HTML files. All I've done is I've created different components where each component represents what you would see on a different page. I'm able to then switch between the pages at the moment just by commenting in and out which page I want to show. So if I want to look at the chat page, I simply uncomment that, and then I can see the chat page. If I want to look at the sign-in page, I would comment out the chat in order to comment in the sign-in page. And in fact, if I uncomment in multiple things at once, I can have multiple pages sitting there right on top of each other, which doesn't make them look like multiple pages, but I can then be able to see that they're all interacting the way I expect, right? When I change the user, it lets me say, send a message as that user, and everything's working as we expected. So this idea of structuring your application where you have different pages, different kind of complex views, we think of it as like a page, as their own components, and you should name them like chat page because it tells you that thing's a page, which you can then sort of swap between what you want to show in your main application is a good way of getting started with designing different pages within a React context. Of course, what I'd really like to be able to do is to switch between all of these different pages by clicking on links. So I want to click on home to go to home, click on chat to go to the chat page, click on about to go to the about page, click on the user to go to the sign-in page, and so on and so forth. So the way that we're going to do that is by using this React Router application. So what we're going to do to make that work then is we're going to use React Router to create what is called a single page application. So we're only going to have one page, right? One index.html file. There's only one React app. It's just that we're going to make it act as if there were multiple pages, so that when I click on hyperlinks, we see different content as if I load a different page, and my URL changes along the same time. So as an example of what a single page application looks like in practice, so you get a sense for like what this is going to feel like, is I'm going to show off my favorite example of a single page application, which is Google Drive. This is my own personal drive. Please don't try to look into this in more detail. So of course, you'll know, if you are probably familiar, if you go to things like, sort of these kind of applications, right? The Google Drive will list out a bunch of different folders when I'm at this particular URL of this drive.google.com drive/my drive will list out all the stuff inside of my drive. If I go into a different folder, like I go into the folder for all my work for my previous quarters that I've taught, that will then take me to a different URL, right? Drive folders and then one TLK yada yada yada, and that will then list out all my different folders, right? If I go into one of these in more details, then I can go into, again, I get to a different folder that's now 10RHXY, right? So that each folder has its own URL. What that's useful for is it means that if I was sharing this folder with somebody, I could copy and paste that URL and email it to them or text them, and they'd be able to access it directly. Right? I can bookmark that URL. It treats all of these as if each URL or each folder is a different web page. It exists at a different location. But what you'll notice is that as I move back and forth between these folders, right, as I click into and out of these folders, none of this stuff is changing, right? This drive, this search, these buttons, that all isn't reloading. It's all staying exactly the same, right? My reload button never flickers because I'm never loading a different page. I'm not actually going to a different URL. I'm not sending a request to the browser, the server, and the server's not sending me a different page. My browser's never reloading. It's only loading and changing the content that I want to be displaying at any given time. So this is a single page application. This entire thing is loading inside of a single web page. We're just adding in some functionality, some interactivity, so that when you click on buttons or you click on things, it looks like it acts as if it were going to a different URL. And those URLs, of course, get me where I need to go, right? If I take this URL and I try literally just loading that URL, it takes me to the place I want to be, right? That stuff's all stays the same. So that's an example of a single page application. And that's how we're going to build our React applications to work, right? They're all going to be designed around a single index.html file, which we don't even touch, and our single app component, and then they'll render the different pages depending on when we switch between them. The basic idea on how this is going to work, this is sort of the pseudocode. It's not the actual code we're going to write. But roughly what we're going to do is we're going to use some conditional rendering kinds of behaviors to say, depending on what's in the current URL, let's show different content. So you can imagine effectively what we're going to do is we're going to write our app component so that it will look at the current URL. It'll say, what URL are we currently showing? And then based on that, it will determine which component do we want to render. So we might say, like, if the current URL is the home path, right? It's going to be and then /home. Then we know that we'll say the component I should be showing inside of my app should be the home page. So that my app is going to look like a div containing a home page. If, on the other hand, my current URL is about, then we know that my app is going to look, the component my app's going to render will be an about page. So my app will look like a div with an about page in the middle. So effectively, we're going to add, in effect, not exactly, but in effect, we're going to add a bunch of if statements. It's going to say, if I'm on the welcome page, show welcome. If I'm on chat, show chat. If I'm on about, show about. If I'm on sign in, show sign in, and so forth. We could do that work, right? We could write those if statements, and we could just write exactly the pseudocode, and that would give us something similar to a single page application. It gives us similar to that kind of navigation. But what we want to do is we want to be able to look at things like the current URL, and we want to make sure that when I go to when I click on a link, it changes that URL. We want to make sure that's all integrated together so it actually interacts with the browser as if it were a multi-page application. In order to do that, we're going to use React Router. So React Router is a React library. It's a library of components that basically provide those if statements, right? Router provides a number of components that basically do this work. That component will look at the existing URL, and then based on that URL, determine what other component to render. It basically does that conditional if statement. Think of it as like an if component. That's basically what it gives us. So React Router is an additional library. It's not built into React. It's not even sort of produced by Facebook. It's a different library that provides this kind of routing. There are lots of other routing behaviors. Routing is what we call when you say go to this URL, routes to or goes to, shows this different component. There are lots of different router libraries out there. React Router is probably the oldest and maybe the most popular just because it's the most well established. It's not necessarily the best. It's slightly big. It can be a little clunky, but it's kind of the standard that you should learn. And everything else is often, again, reacting or responding to its design. So if we want to go use React Router, we can go ahead and do the same thing we've done with any other library. We're going to install it. We're going to import its components, and then we're going to render those components to make our page do what we want. So we'll start by installing the library. The library is called React Router DOM. It's not just React Router. There's actually different versions of React Router. We're interested in the one that's going to work on the DOM on the web as opposed to the one that works on like native React. So we're going to install React Router DOM. Again, we'll go back to our command line. We'll use npm install React Router DOM, which will install that package. It's very small. That, of course, is now getting added into our package.json file so that now we can see that React Router DOM is available to us and for us to be able to use. And again, if anyone else wants to use this later, they just have to run npm install in order to be able to just download whatever missing dependencies they might be missing. All right. From that, we can then begin importing components. So we're going to import components from React Router DOM. I'll start with these. We'll go over what all the components we import are going to do. But we would, for example, in our app, we could import the routes plural component as well as the route singular component from React Router DOM in order to be able to use those components. All right, we'll go over exactly what these components do and how to use them in just a second. So the first thing I want to note is that I've got a link here to the documentation. We are using React Router version 6. React Router version 6 came out in November 2021, so it's a couple years old by the recording of this video. It's worth noting that React Router 6 is not compatible with React Router 5, which is not compatible with React Router 4, which is not compatible with React Router 3. React Router 5 looks similar to React Router 3, but they're not the same. React Router 6 looks kind of similar back to React Router 4. There's a whole like weird jump, like waffling back and forth between different structures to make this work. So the reason I mentioned being explicit that we're using version 6 is because this video and what we're doing in this course works off of version 6. If you go looking for other examples on how to do React Router, you might find examples from version 5, 4, 3, or 2. Those will not work. Don't use those. That's not what we're doing. We're doing stuff in version 6. I'm also going to note that sort of later changes have happened since then. So for example, there was a pretty big change in September 2022, which added data APIs. That's not relevant. That's sort of more advanced than what we're working with for this course. And in this video, we're not going to touch on that pieces. I'll also note that later versions of React Router that have come out since have added some new and alternate syntax for getting these components working, right? Other sort of ways of creating them other than just rendering components the way that we're used to. That's kind of, in many ways, the recommended practice from React Router, but I'm actually not going to do that in this video. We're going to use the sort of syntax that's most similar to the React that we're already learning. This is the goal of trying to keep the amount of things and sort of syntaxes you have to remember in your head, like keep that smaller, and let's really be able to focus on this idea of we're rendering components that show different content. So we're going to use one that I think feels cleaner to me as the instructor recording this video, and so that's what we're going to go with. Please stick with that for this course, for these videos. If you want to do something else later, that's fine. But again, for this course, we're going to stick with building it in this kind of way. All right, great. So we've got our router in place. We know what we're going to do with it. Now we can actually start getting our page to have multiple pages by routing to different components. So the first component we need to render is what's called a browser router, which is kind of fun to say. If you say it a lot, right? Browser router, just a fun word to say. The browser router is a component that keeps track of the URL. It does that work of figuring out what's the current URL, and then whenever that changes, letting all of its kids know by passing it down as a kind of prop. So it's going to say, hey, kid, your URL is different. You might want to show something different, right? There's different content in there. This is an example of a router. There's a number of different routers that React Router supports. Browser router is the one that works best for the browser. The way that we do this then, and we're going to want to import browser router from React Router DOM, and we're going to do this inside of our index.js file. I know we haven't done much in the index.js file yet, but this is a place where we're going to do that work. Because what we want to do is we want our browser router to be able to tell all of its kids the current URL, which includes the app, right? We want our app to be able to know what the current URL is so that the app can do behavior based on that. So therefore, we're going to render the app as a child of the browser router, right? We're going to put the app inside the browser router. This is kind of considered a best practice for being able to make sure that you can actually work through different kinds of routers. It tends to be kind of produce the best kind of effect. It's what you're going to need to make sure all your exercises for this class work. So that's how we're going to build this together. We're going to render a browser router component, and then its child will be our app. Note that this is not a self-closed component because it has a kid inside of it. This is an example of what's called a provider in React. It's a particular pattern for the ways that we sort of have different components be able to sort of inform other components of the current status of the sort of context. It's a pattern you'll see a lot as we get to more advanced React. We won't get to it too much in this course, but it's a thing that you will see as you go and keep doing more React stuff in the future. So yes, we're going to render our browser router. Now, so far, this hasn't changed anything, right? Our app still renders all exactly the same. Once we've got our browser router in place, then we can begin specifying what are called the routes. A route is what specifies at what URL do we want to show what component. So we might have a home route that says that if the URL is /home, show the home page. We might have an about route that says if the URL is /about, show the about page. We define these routes by using a route component. A route component is going to take two props. One is going to be which path we want to show that route at, right? Which one should it match? And then an element prop that's going to take as its content the component we actually want to render, right? So in this case, because remember that we can pass any value we want to a prop. We're not passing an array or an object or a function here. We're actually passing in a rendered component as a prop. This is the component I want you to put on the screen. So we can do that work inside of our image. We can say that I want to have a route whose path is going to be home. I'm going to use absolute paths here just because it doesn't matter too much because this is going to be a top level route. But I'm going to use absolute paths here just to make sure that we're like all tracking it correctly. Who the element we'll then render, right? The thing we're going to show will be this static welcome page. That's what we're going to show at this route. It does mean that you're going to get this really weird kind of content, right? You're going to get this text that looks like arrow, it looks like a bunch of little hats on top of each other. That's because we are closing this component. We are then closing this prop. We are then closing this component, right? That's how we're hooking these things all together. Right, so that can give us our home. Similarly, we can add in a route whose path might be chat and whose element can be my chat page here. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste my entire chat page as that element. Again, this is again the point where we're nesting things fairly deeply, which just makes it a little bit harder to read. But it's not too bad as long as you really think about, sorry, this a route, and here's the route showing this particular element. Okay, and then we'll add one more to start with, and then we can add the rest. We'll add a route path is going to be to about, and then that element should be this static about page. Yeah, I mean, if we throw this all into one line, like you can start seeing how this starts getting a little bit messy, right? Because now we've got a whole bunch of little hats in a row. So that's okay. We'll keep them in mind. It'll work fine. All right, we'll deal with sign in and sign out. Cool. So we've added in these three different routes. Now remember, the reason I'm able to use this route component is because I'd already copied and pasted in the importing the route from React Router. Now all route components that I render have to be shown as children of a routes list. Think of this as like the dispatcher, right? The routes is going to say, okay, we're at like an intersection, a crossroad. Which path do you want to get to? Routes lets us then pick which route we want to show. Routes can only contain route elements as children, and route elements have to be children of routes. So you can't put divs or anything else in the middle. You have to only put sort of these path components in the middle. So we can do that. We can then have this be a routes, which basically says we're picking a different page depending on the URL at this spot. Here are the different pages that we might pick from. And now we're done picking a different page. Okay. Actually, I'm going to make this so this isn't slash. Well, no, we'll leave the hope for the moment. Okay. Now at the moment, when I refresh my page, you'll notice that it doesn't show anything at the home page. Like all my content is gone because there's no route that matches the sort of just the route, right? You'll notice there's no path to my URL, so there's no route at that path. We don't show anything. If I go to /home, I can see my home page. If I go to /about, I can see my about page. And if I go to /chat, I can see my chat page that continues to work as expected. So I'm now able to go to different URLs, and each URL will take me to a different page. It lets me see different content. And of course, I can click on my hyperlinks to be able to go back and forth between these things. Okay. So my home page, right? We probably often want to have your home not have to have like a /home or a /index after it. You want to just show the content. So we can specify that path by using just saying I want it to be a /. It's just an empty path, right? This is like saying at the home path, don't do anything else. That works fine. As a shortcut for doing that work, right? As a shortcut for path is equal to, just /. You can instead use a special keyword called index. That's all that index means. It just means the path is equal to /. It's just a shortcut for doing exactly that work. This is called an index route. It's the route to the index, to sort of the home page, the starting out place of where we're going. This is an index route. Note that when we say index route, we mean a route whose path doesn't have a path, it's just an index. We don't mean a route whose path is index, right? That's not what we mean by index route, because that means you'd actually literally have to type in /index, which you may want to do for some pages, but not for most. So instead, we'll rather just use an index route here, right? In which case, now there's no route matches for index. Cool. Of course, it would be nice that if I typed in index by accident, instead of having it just show a blank screen and give me kind of a warning message in the console, it'd be nice if we actually had something like we showed that you were at the wrong route, that your page is incorrect. We can do that. We can take by adding another route. We can have a route whose path can just be star. And a star path matches to everything, right? This means that it's just like this is a wildcard character, similar from what you do on the command line. Says that this path will match anything that hasn't previously been matched. So if we already found a route, if we already checked our path and it was the index, we'd show this route. If our path was already /chat, we'd show that route. But if we've checked all these previous things and we get to the end and our end has path is just whatever, we can show something else instead. So here's where we might have our element be equal to our error page. And now if I go to /index, it tells me page not found. If I go to, just whatever, it goes to page not found. And if I go to home, we're back at home and everything's working great. Awesome. Cool. I'm going to add in a quick route for my sign in just to make that work, just to make sure it's all in place. So this is going to be for /sign in. I think that's what I want my route to be. Yep, sign in. And then this element is going to be my sign in page. And with that, I can click the sign in, chat, and everything's great. Awesome. So at this point, I now am able to navigate between multiple pages. And all I did was I had to find those pages as their own components. And I just included a route and a set of individual routes telling me which path should go to which component. That's the basics of how we get routing. Okay. The second piece we need to keep in track of are links. So let's see this in action. So I can go to chat and I can say, hello, I'm Parrot. Right. If I then say, go to my sign in and I click on Penguin, I can now switch to being Penguin. And if I go to chat, my message is gone and I've actually switched back to being Parrot, even though I tried switching to Penguin. Right. Try it again. Right. I go to Penguin. When I go to chat, it's back to Parrot. The reason that's happening here is because when I click on this sign-in link, notice here at the top, right, when I switch back and forth between these two, my page is reloading, right? I'm refreshing the page. I'm visiting it fresh. And because the page is reloading, it's restarting out from it's like reloading the whole page, right? My state is going back to its initial set of values. We've lost the fact that I've stored my posted messages and I stored my current user in that state. My state's getting reset. So the reason that's happening is because in my header bar here, I'm just using hyperlinks, right? Anchor elements. And these anchor elements say, go to this place. And when you click on an anchor element, the browser sends an HTTP request to the server. The server says, here's what you want. And it starts showing that content and it resends it back again. We don't want that to happen, right? I want to make it so that when I click on that link, and like you putting link in air quotes, you can't see because it's not recording my video, but when I click on this button, this link, I don't actually want to refresh the page. I want to just change what route is currently being shown. We can do that using React Router by using an element called a link element. A link element is used in place of an anchor. And what it does, it creates a specialized kind of anchor element that will then make it so that when you click on it, it doesn't actually leave the page. Instead, it just changes the URL, it changes the route without reloading the whole thing. So it basically allows us to have internal links between pages. Now, we use a link in place of an anchor. We don't put the anchor inside the link. We don't put the link inside the anchor. The link is the anchor. It will render an anchor element in the DOM with a bunch of specialized behavior and sort of interactions built on top of that to make sure that when you click on it, it doesn't actually take you to a different web page. All right. So in order to do this work, we're going to have to import link, right? Because we need to use this component. So we're going to import link from React Router DOM as normal. What we can then do is we can then take our anchor elements, and instead of having an anchor element, we can use a link element. So again, I'm replacing both the start and end tag with link. And a link element, instead of having a href attribute, it has a different prop called to. So the way you would read this is a link to the home path. And that's what we're doing. We're saying change to this particular route, change to this kind of behavior. So we can say I want to link to home. I can say I want to link to chat. Link an anchor element. I want to link to about. And in this case, I want to link to sign in. Everything else stays the same. I can still include things like class names. I can still include every attribute or every prop I would have put on an anchor element. That'll all work the same. We're now creating a specialized kind of anchor element, which is a router link. All right. With that in place, if I click on home, notice that it changes the URL and it shows me that page without re-rendering and reloading the page. Right? When I go to chat and home, nothing is getting reloaded here. Nothing's changing in that corner. I go to about and I go to sign in, it all stays the same. So I can go to chat and I can say, I am Parrot. Right, message gets posted. I can go to my sign in. I can switch over to Penguin, go back to chat. My I am Parrot message is still there. I can say I am Penguin. That shows up there. I can go back to sign in. I can switch back to Parrot, go back to my chat, and everything is still working. So my page is never reloading and all my state is being maintained, right? It's all staying exactly the same way. I moved all that state that needs to stay the same. So all my existing messages and my current user, I put all those into the app so that even as I move between these subcomponents, these subpages, that data will always stay the same. That data will always be there. Great. And that gives us hyperlinking. With that, that's the basics of getting React Router working, right? We specify what we want our routes to be, right? Generally inside of app, we say this route show this component. We then specify, in order to navigate between things, we specify the hyperlinks using the link component, which lets us then navigate back and forth between those. Note that not all hyperlinks need to be router links, right? If you have a hyperlink that goes to like Google or Wikipedia or some other page that's not part of your app, that can still be an anchor element, right? Links here are really for when I want to navigate within the current application, right? I want to make it so that when I click on this link, I'm going to a particular route within this page. I'm using absolute paths here, but you can also do this relatively if you want to have like nested segments and stuff. Cool. And that's the basic idea of place. Okay, awesome. Great. Other things I want to make sure to note. So if we really think about URLs, right? Because this is really based around the URL that we're trying to structure, right? All web pages have a particular URL format. We're starting off when, and this is again, our page looks at, we're at localhost 3000. That's our sort of domain and port. The thing that we're modifying here, the thing that we're working with is our path. So whenever we're specifying a route, what we're really specifying here is the path to a different component. We're saying what component should I see at this particular path. So my domain important schema stays the same. My query isn't really relevant here. So when we're talking about different routes, we're talking about different paths that we want to be able to see. Okay. So the way that we often want to think about that is because that's really what we're trying to do is we're trying to say at this path, show this particular content. When you're designing the routes for your page, when you're coming up with what you want that to be, you really want to follow that kind of structure. What you really want to think about is that having each route, each path showing a particular set of information called a resource in sort of the RESTful architecture that the web is built on. So for example, you really want to think about at this particular route, what content do I want to show? So you might think like, okay, if I'm go to this just the home route, the index route, what do I want to here, let's go back to the app. If I go to my index route, what do I want to see? Well, I should see a welcome page. Or if I go to /chat, what should I see? See a chat page. If I go to /sign in, what should I see? So you really want to think through at this route, what kind of content do I then see at that location? And you can think about this in more detail, right? You might say, like, for example, if I go to the products route, maybe I want to see, a page that has all my products. If I go to products/hat, maybe I want to go to a page about a particular hat. If I go to products/shoes, maybe I want to go to a page about shoes. If I go to account, I want to go to the account page. And you can really think through at these particular URLs, at these paths, what content do I want to see? So really what tends to work well is thinking about what route shows what content, right? What is the path that lets me see this particular set of content? Don't necessarily think about sort of what's the content you need to have and then what routes match to it. Think about sort of like, if I go to this location, what should I see? And then think about what locations will get you to what the things you want to be able to see. You want to be careful. You're not really thinking about these routes in terms of what necessarily just what components are getting rendered. You're really thinking about them of what resource a user is seeing. So we probably wouldn't have a route that would be like /purchase because that's an action. It's not that you don't see a purchase saying, right? You see like maybe the result of your purchase, maybe you see an invoice, but you don't go to a route in order to say do some data processing. Routes are about information you see. The processing that would happen there, right? The actual purchasing behavior would probably happen when I click a button as part of moving between routes, right? Not linking between them, but when I click a button, we process my purchase, and then we also might move myself to a different route. So really thinking about like what routes go to what components or what information is a really good way to start designing how you want to build your single page, you're building your sort of your route-based application. All right. A couple more pieces of sort of complexities that we can add about React Router that I want to make sure to show off. It's possible to have routes that support multiple segments. So a segment in a URL is what happens between each of our slashes here, right? So this is the first segment is product, and the second one is shoes. We can actually specify what wants to happen at each individual segment by nesting routes in our sort of router structure. So for example, I could specify a route that has one route that is /user, or just user, and another route that is profile. What this is saying to do is that when the user goes to /user/profile in their URL, then first, because the first segment is /user, it'll show a user layout. And then because the second segment is profile, it will show the user profile. The user profile component will go inside the user layout, and it goes inside there, replacing a component called an outlet. And an outlet is, again, another component we would import and render from React Router DOM. So what I can specify happens is that my user layout, right? What happens if I'm looking at sort of the user's page might have a particular kind of layout, right? Maybe it has a particular H1, maybe it has a particular sidebar, particular navigations. And then depending on the second segment, am I looking at the profile? Am I looking at the favorites? I might see different content inside of that profile or inside of that favorites. On the other hand, if I went to just route items, then maybe I'm going to see an items list that won't have this user-specific layout. I'm not have it actually logged in to be able to see it at the moment, but the most common place you'll be able to see this happen. Okay, I can't actually show it off in this video, which is fine. But if you go to GitHub and you go to for example, like the repository page for info 340/React chat, this application we're working on, right? It has a particular layout for showing the sort of that repository, right? That's sort of the repository layout, and then it might show different components based on that. If you actually sign in and you go to like your settings for your user, you're actually gonna see a different layout with different styling and different kinds of navigation. That might be like the user profile, the user settings layout. This is what lets us do that work. I can specify different layouts based on that first segment of my URL. I'm not going to give off a full demo of this happening, but I want to sort of indicate that's the thing that you can use. It's really useful more for more advanced or complex routing structures, right? Where you really want to have like a multiple nested sets of segments, and you want to be able to say like, I have these different kinds of pages, or I have my repository pages, and I have my user settings pages, and I want those to have their own kinds of layouts, but they're all within the same application. That's when this becomes really useful for. But for slightly smaller projects, kind of on the scope of what we're learning in this class, you may or may not end up using too many outlets along the way. The one useful place that it is useful to use an outlet is you can use it to do some authentication and some authorization for different components. So for example, I can include a component at sort of just every path, right? So this isn't even an index path, it's just literally like it works at any path and always shows this, where it'll render the required auth, right? This sort of required component, is sort of this like check your user page. And if that's in that component, I can do things like see if the user is logged in, if the user is someone who's allowed to see this content. And if they're not, show them that the page is forbidden. And if they are, show them an outlet so that we can then see the nested path inside of there. This becomes a really useful way of making sure that, for example, only certain pages are only visible if a user is logged in, if the user is set, and if they're not visible, if that can't happen, then the user can be shown a different page or redirected to be somewhere else. Great. Okay, I'm not going to go through a full demo of that. Try to keep this video a little bit tighter, but again, this is a thing that we can do around with these these outlets. All right. The one other piece I do want to show a demo of, because it's relevant, is that sometimes I want to have different routes that show the different components, but have different kind of props or data along with it. So as in our example from kind of the previous kind of just like written example, I might say that if I want to go to path/products, I want to see all the products at once. But if I go to /product/hat, I want to see a products detail page for a hat. If I go to product/shoes, I want to see the product details page for the shoes. In my chat application, if I go to just /chat, I maybe want to see like, I don't know what I want. I maybe want to see the general channel, right? Sort of a default channel. But if I go to /chat/social, I'd like to be able to see the social channel. If I go to /chat/random, I'd like to see the random channel, right? I want to have a unique URL, right? A unique part of that path that tells me what channel I'm seeing. This is the same kind of behavior we saw in the Google Drive, right? Where depending on what that URL, what that last segment is, right? That variable is, that tells us which folder I want to see. In this case, I want to show which channel do I want to see, which product do I want to see, the same kind of idea. So we do that using what are called URL parameters. So a URL parameter is basically a variable in the URL's path. So it's similar to, again, like this extra piece here, right? This random string, it's like a variable, right? And we can say if that variable is 1T1L, show this folder. If that variable is 10RH, show this folder instead. Right? If that folder is nothing, just show them my drive and we're good to go. So we can define these different variables as part of our paths. So for example, GitHub supports a series of paths where you might go to /user/username, and you use a colon in the URL to indicate that when you're sort of specifying the path. And that colon is indicating that this username is a variable, right? I could write /user/info340 and see the details for the info340 user. I could go to /user/Joel Ross and see the details for the Joel Ross user. Similarly, I could do things for like for repositories, right? If I go to /user/Joel Ross repos, I see Joel Ross's repos. If I go to user/info340 repos, I see the 340 repos. You got multiple variables, or I can go to /org info340 and then the lecture demos repo versus info340 / the project starter repo, putting those together. So we use this colon syntax as a way of indicating that a part of a segment is a variable. So it's not actually typing in the string USERNAME, right? That's not actually what the path is going in here. It's saying that you're going to replace this with some other string, the value of that variable. It's also supposed to write this using curly braces, similar to how we have things like inline expressions in React. So that is a syntax that can get used sometimes in APIs or when you're sort of looking at sort of URL pathing routing structures. We don't use that with React Router. React Router uses this colon. All right, so what does that mean? Well, what it means that we can then do is we can specify these URL parameters through React Router. So in our route segment here, right, in my chat page, I could say I would like to go to /chat/ some channel name. And as long as I go to some channel name, it should show me the chat page. And it'll do that no matter what channel name I put in. So for example, if I go to chat random, it'll show me the chat page because this word random here is now a variable. If I go to chat general, it still shows me the chat page because again, that is just a variable. If I go to chat, whatever, it still shows me that content because that's the variable. If I have another segment after it, now it's not found anymore because there isn't a route that matches the word chat, some other variable segment, and then something else after that. There's no such thing. If I go to general and something else, again, it still doesn't work. You'll also note that even if I just go to /chat, now it doesn't work anymore because this chat page is saying that it needs to have a word. You need to go to the URL chat / something else. There needs to be some other thing that happens after that. If you put a question mark after that, you're going to say this thing is allowed to be optional. They may or may not include that path, that URL, that variable in that segment, and that will allow us to support so that when I click on chat, it still goes to chat. This is now going to make it so that when I click on my channels, right, those things should now show, we want those things to show me the channel that I want. Note that these are all reloading the page. That's because they're all hyperlinks at the moment. I'm going to go fix that real fast. Just make sure it all works. So I'm going to again replace the anchor elements here with links. Make sure we import link. So make sure I import links so that now when I click on those things, and again, because I've used a map here, I'll only change it in one place. So now when I click on these, oop, why didn't you work? Uh-oh, why are you not working? Okay, hold on. If I'm doing something wrong, if everyone's been wrong, why are they all going to random? Why are you all doing? Oh, two. That's the difference. See, we all make mistakes, and I'm doing it in record video, and that's fine because I can't edit these videos. So all right, great. So console again. So now when I click on these links in my sidebar, it takes me to those. It should take me to those different channels. Great. So the idea of we've added in this variable that now tells us which channel I want to be seeing. It's still rendering the chat page, but now in my chat page, I can say, let's go and look at what channel the URL says we should be showing, and then show the content for that URL. So we can do that then in my chat page, in our chat pane, because our chat pane is the one that actually does this work. Nope, sorry. Chat page is where this works. Yeah, it's inside chat page. So currently my chat page is always showing the current channel as general. We've hard coded that in. But what I'd like to make this do is I want to instead make it be dependent on the URL. So if my URL variable, right, again, if this second segment, this variable segment is the word birds, then the current channel will be birds. If my segment here is general, then that current channel will be general. If this channel is whatever, then that channel will be whatever, and it'll then be able to render that content in the way that in that sense. Okay, the way that we can get this URL, we can get what that word is. I can say, okay, what word is in that variables in that URL, is by using another hook. So remember we talked about hooks previously. UseState was the hook that we introduced. That's a way of letting us sort of hook into the React lifecycle. React Router DOM provides a number of hooks we can use as well to sort of hook into the routing that's going on in order to get more information about it. One of those hooks we're allowed to use is called use params. And use params is going to let us use the URL parameters, right? These variable segments, these variable names that are included as part of the path. So we can import that hook by importing the use params function from React Router DOM. And once we've imported that hook, remember, hooks are just functions. We can go ahead and we can call this function. So I'm going to call this function. I'm just going to do it up here in the, I'll do it right here. Seems pretty place to do it. No, I'll do it up here. It doesn't make a difference. I'm trying to figure out how to organize the code. So how about the result of calling use params? I'll just log out what is that result. So we can say we're going to call the use params function. This function doesn't take any arguments, and we're going to see what do we get back. Well, when I load my page now, what I get back is an object. You can tell it's an object. It's got curly braces here, where that object has a key, where that key is the URL parameter name and the value. So because we called this /chat/channel name, the thing that goes in this spot that sort of fills in that blank, and the reason it's a blank is because it's got this colon in front of it, but what fills in that blank is the word general. So therefore, the word general is assigned to the channel name, right? Because we called this variable channel name is assigned to the channel name param, right? If I put in random, then random is assigned to the channel name param. If I call this channel name segment, right? Then when I refresh, then because I've named this variable channel name seg in my use params, I'm getting channel name seg as the key, as the property inside that object. If I have multiple segments, so if I had channel name slash something else, right? Like for example, the way I had user repo, right? If I then went to random and other, then you can see that the word random, that first segment, is being assigned to channel name, right? Random goes to channel name. And then the word other is being assigned to the something param. So the other is being assigned to the something param. So if you have multiple parameters in your path or in your URL, they're all going to get assigned to this object, which is this use params object. I don't actually want multiple parameters here. I just want the one, just the channel name. So we're going to go ahead and just go back to having a single channel name. And we'll go back to general as the place we're going to start. All right. So the results here are really going to be the params, right? Those are my params. And I know that then the current channel should be go to that params object. Remember, params is an object here. This will be an object. Right? It's my params object. We go to that params object, and we're going to access the value of the channel name property, right? So get me the channel name variable out of my parameters. Note that we're not getting the channel name directly. Use params doesn't get me the channel name directly. It gets me the object, the set of all parameters there. The same way that props gives me the set of all props. This gives me a set of all parameters, and we get the channel name prop out of that. I then assign that to my current channel, which has already been declared, so I don't need to declare a second time. And with that, my application, because I've written out all my other application to make sure it's filtering based on the current channel already, now that I've assigned my current channel to be based on that prop, when I click on different channels, right, the random channel, the social channel, I see different content, right? So this is social, can get posted to social, I can go back to random and then over to social. And because each message is being posted to an individual channel and I'm filtering for those channels, and I choose which channel I want to see based on this URL, I'm able to support having multiple different channels, right, inside my application. And with that, that gives us our URL parameters. That's going to let us be able to have multiple different kinds of, these let us see different details of different URLs. This is great for things, I mean, it's good for things like channel names for chatting message. It's good for things we want to see like detail views, like similar to what, again, we did with Google Drive, right? If I want to see the details for this folder, I can use some particular variable parameter to indicate which folder I want to see. Details for a particular recipe, a particular product, a particular whatever. You can have those go inside that URL parameter. The same thing you see in things like Amazon or YouTube, where each one has their own individual URL. They have their own parameter to drive that work. These parameters don't necessarily need to be human readable, right? Google's URLs are no way human readable. It's just a random code. That's fine if you want to use a random, like, sort of hash code that, an ID code for each data property. That's okay. But the key is this is going to let us be able to have a sort of blank in our URL and specify that I want to see different content, different details, right, within the same kind of overall structure, but different sort of data at a particular URL. All right, and that's how we use React Router, sort of the level that we're going to work with it at. So again, the main things to keep in mind is that we can specify our routes by indicating a routes component with a bunch of individual route components inside of it, each of which say which path I want to see, what component do I want to see at a particular URL, and then our element that says what component do I show at that location. If we then specify our multiple different routes, that'll let us be able to see different pages. We add links in order to be able to click links to the different routes in order to be able to click between these different routes in order to see what we want to see. And that will give us the ability to navigate around our application and do all the things that we want to do.